allies. Hi, everybody who is a part of the EQUUS family. My name is Kelly Wendorf. I am the CEO and founder of EQUUS, and we are a leadership and personal development organization based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we're in the business of changing lives and helping people to be the best human they can be inside their community, inside their families, and their organizations. And I'm so happy to be here. I love this format. Today we are joined by Andrew Cohn, who is a newly minted EQUUS faculty member. He is an ICF certified coach. He is the principal and founder of Lighthouse Consulting. He is a very gifted coach and mentor and consultant. And each of our faculty have a unique kind of gift that they bring both to the shared EQUUS space and what we bring to our clients, but also, to the world and to each of their clients that they serve, either inside their own companies or with EQUUS. And so over time, you will get to know probably each of our faculty members. Mm-hmm. Andrew's particular, he has many gifts, but a particular gift and sort of area of focus, I would say, that the space he likes to hold with clients is around the intersection of spirituality and leadership. And so we're going to talk about that today. And he also has a podcast that is about to launch by the same title, Spirituality and Leadership. So we will be promoting that and sharing that with people so that you can benefit from all the interviews he does. So welcome, Andrew. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's not often that you speak with someone and you're introduced with your superpower.
Yeah. Yeah. And what would it be like if we were all introduced with our superpower? How might that change things?
It's a beautiful question. And at the same time, to be very clear, I don't lead with spirituality and leadership. If the vast majority of my work is in the corporate world, and I don't go in waving some banner around spirituality, because it means so many different things to so many different people. It can be contentious and divisive, and it can be a weapon, and it's just a very, very personal thing. So as it is personal with me. So it's more about identifying what that is for people and rolling that into our conversation, whether it's with a team or an individual leader or whatever it might be. So but I love the way I appreciate the introduction. Thank you.
So how do you define spirituality in this context?
So I don't. I define my conversation around spirituality and leadership as the dimensions of ourselves as human beings that are beneath the physical level of our lives, that are beneath the emotional, mental, ego cluster, and down into that self level that's been written about for eons in different faiths and poetry and art. And just it's a universal set of what I believe is universal, a universal set of principles and behaviors that could be labeled spiritual. Some people don't call it spiritual. Some people, that's just being a good person. Okay. So I don't need to identify it a certain way. I make the distinction that this isn't about let's bring people together to talk about their spiritual practices, but rather the spiritual dimensions of each of us that many of us work so hard to cultivate. The conversation I'm trying to introduce is about how do we bring the benefits of those practices into the workplace where they are so needed right now. So I define spirituality and leadership as bringing those core human self-level, what I would call personally, in my opinion, spiritual dimensions into the workplace for the benefit of my satisfaction and performance, the benefit of my team, and the benefit of my organization.
So are there certain qualities of, how you would name spirituality? I'm thinking of, presence maybe being a word. Are there more like that?
Well, so I hear you say presence, and I know that's such a big part of your work. So you have you would sidle over to a certain cluster of definitions because of the work that you do. Somebody else would do another. And I love that. That's one of the things I love about this conversation. So yes, presence for sure. I would also include in that, just as a shoot down the middle for some of these qualities, acceptance, loving, forgiveness, patience, caring, empathy, that grouping, all of those to me live in that place. Peace.
Yeah. But what I hear you saying is that really the conversation is it's not like you have a framework, like this is the spirituality and leadership framework and it's these 5 principles, and it's more that it's a living conversation that can happen between you and another, or you and a team, or you and an organization that has qualities that may be meaningful to them. Like you pointed out, in my world, of course, the word I bring up is presence, but someone else may bring up faith, for example, and that is part of this context. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, the framework is there are these behaviors that are often associated with or distill from activities or practices or beliefs that some people would label spiritual, whatever that may mean for people. So there's all of this that we often work so hard to develop individually, and there's the need for all of it here in the workplace. How do we invite in those qualities, invite other people to bring in those dimensions without being dogmatized by the label of, we can't talk about that spiritual. It's like, no, if we're talking about forgiving or caring, accepting or loving, there's a place for that in the workplace now more than ever, is my hypothesis. That's the framework. How we get to those spiritual dimensions is not the framework. That's the part that I think could be, it's dismissing or alienating, and my guru is bigger than your guru. That we don't need to go there to make the point and to get the value of bringing these qualities into the workplace.
Yeah. So earlier you said you don't lead with this, which I know you well enough to know that that's true, that you kind of you embody it, and that's a sort of space that you open up without even necessarily words, but it is something that sort of ends up being part of the coaching conversation or part of the workshop space, because you're naturally holding these spaces of acceptance, loving, caring, the humanity part. So, but how do you do that? And I'm asking that question because a lot of the EQUUS community, a lot of them are coaches. A lot of them may not be, certified coaches, but they are in the space of consulting, leading, supporting, assisting. And I feel that many of those folks kind of in a way feel like they have to stay in the closet, that my spirituality and how I hold the sacred has to stay over here in this box, because if, this team or this organization or this client had a whiff of it, it would scare them away. And so they feel a little bit compartmentalized. And I'm very aware of an overwhelming sense that many professionals are yearning to sort of come out of that closet and claim their spirituality and not make it a thing. So how do you integrate that for yourself as the professional?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny as you talk about coming out of the closet. I'm wondering what would be the more spiritual equivalent of that? Come out of the kiva, come out of the
kiva, you can come out of the confessional,
sacred, the holy of holies, whatever it's called. Exactly. So, but so I don't need to broach the subject for the sake of broaching the subject. The purpose of broaching the subject is to get to what the client is looking for individually or as a team or as an organization. And so, but some ways to get there, to be responsive to your question, some ways are, what do you value? What are your values when we talk about integrity and honesty and inclusivity and kindness? When we talk about, integrity, those types of things, it's like you're getting into some things now that are related to these set of behaviors. What is your purpose? What am I here to do? What's the bigger game here other than the quarterly earnings or short-term results or something like that, or the dollar figure, because the dollars are an outcome, not a goal, in my view. Or what is your legacy? Depending upon where someone is in his or her career, someone we're working with, what is their legacy? That elicits these things. So I don't want to raise that. I mean, you and I've talked about this before with meditation. You don't meditate to be a better meditator. You meditate to do whatever it is you do in your life better. And similarly, these principles are brought in, and these behaviors are brought into our lives so that whatever it is that we're doing, we can do it better. We could be more on purpose. We could have more of a deliberate legacy. We could live our values and recognize what they are, and we can encourage other people to do the same. So that's part of the leadership piece that we're starting to move towards in this conversation. That's the leadership piece. As to the extent that I can invite other people into this conversation. I'm not talking about God when I do this or my spiritual practice or whatever, right? That we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
But what we're talking, but part of what this conversation about is like, what do I? The one question that I've asked people before, and I've gotten good response to this question, is, what do you get from your spiritual practice? Because I'd love to hear about that much more than I'd love to hear about your specific spiritual practice, although I have space for that, but it's not something we want to talk about necessarily in the workplace. It can be alienating. That is real. That's to be respected. I'm not going to bulldoze that. But if someone says, well, I have this spiritual practice, I love to ask the question, what does it do for you? Because that's something that we can all talk about. We could gather around that.
So even that question though, like what do you get from your spiritual practice? Do you find that even the word spiritual is loaded?
Yes.
Still.
Yes, it is. So it could be, what do you do to stay in balance? What do you get from that? That's fine, because that's what it is.
Right. So I hear you kind of, in a way, code switching.
Yeah, but I hear you, and that's what it is. And it's not about concealment, active concealment. It's about really inclusivity and respecting where people are.
Yes.
Some people just don't want to go anywhere near it, and that's fine. And the most devout people I know, and the devout people whom I respect, which is not all the devout people, but the devout people whom I respect would say to me and have said to me repeatedly, God doesn't care. So if you
whether or not you have a dogma or you do, or you have a practice or you don't. Exactly. So what I meant by code switching is just like finding respectful ways to phrase things and still bring that space alive without having to hit someone over the head with it or use language that could be alienating.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then what do you say to folks who are like, spirituality and leadership don't belong together, or there's no time for that, or that's the fluffy stuff, or that's too woo-woo, or that's nice for that company over there, but it's not for us?
Yeah. Okay. And there are ways into that conversation, behind that conversation. So if I were to hear that for a moment, and I have heard that many times, it's okay, but then, so let's not talk about spirituality. Let's talk about purpose. Let's talk about, is this planet going to be better off because of what we're doing in our organization? Or what kind of parent do you want to be? Or what kind of leader do you want to be? Or when someone has a problem, do you want them to come to you? Are you patient? Are you holding space? Are you empathetic? I don't need to talk about spirituality. It's really not important, except for the people for whom it's important. Then it's important. I mean, as coaches, we know we need to, code switch or otherwise, we need to speak the language of the client. We need to reflect back how they frame things. That's what's important. And there's so many ways to frame what we're talking about here that are honoring all of it. So I'm not concerned about languaging. My job always is to listen, and I'm you know how I am these days with listening. Listening is a priority, and I'm training myself to do more and more. And the better I listen, the less likely I am to step on one of those little claymores, which I don't want to do, of course.
Yeah, beautiful. So listening being definitely a quality of spirituality and leadership, right? This is that skill of listening. So, and I do know that you are kind of like, that's something you've been paying a lot of attention to lately. What can you tell us about listening that you've learned, that you're noticing?
I'm scanning because it's very much in my awareness these days. I'm preparing my next book talk about on a book on listening. So much of listening is about slowing down and tuning into people, recognizing that there's something to learn from everyone, But that doesn't mean that each of us has unlimited time for anyone who may want to talk about anything. And that the way that there's few gifts, I think, that we can give to another person that are more valuable than our attention. And for most people, that means listening to them. In most circumstances, that involves listening to people. It's the people who are our favorite leaders, who are our best friends, are people who get us, who can hear us, who can listen to us. There's something honoring about listening. It's an incredibly powerful leadership ability, that the best leaders are the best listeners. I don't have to repeat. I don't have to repeat myself. I don't have to, wow, she remembered that, right? Or she'll either something from a previous conversation, or even from this conversation, she'll use my language and reflect that back to me. There's an honoring in that. There's a respect in that. There's a lot of power in that. And for many of us, and for me too, sometimes it's untapped if I'm not listening as well as I can be. So there's a delta there that I can grow into and be better. I think a lot of us can. So.
Well, especially because so many of us are paid to be knowers.
Yes.
Right. And we get a lot of kudos for having the answers and for, knowing everything. And so it flips that a little bit.
Right. I love the idea, though, of a consultant, of a high paid consultant coming into a room and the client saying, "I'm so glad you're here. Ask me some questions." I don't think that it's like a cartoon to think that would happen. But in fact, if the client is smart and if the consultant is smart, that's what they'll do.
Indeed. And you, in a private conversation, you and I were talking about, or you were sharing with me this thing about, what is it again? Switching or joint? This concept of switching or
code switching?
No. In listening.
Supporting versus switching.
Supporting versus, yes. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I can talk about that. I will support the question you just asked by responding to it, as opposed to saying, "Oh, that reminds me of something." So as listeners, do we support what we're hearing by asking a question that asks the person to explain a little bit more, or describe their thought process, or tell me how you felt, or what did that mean for you? And those types of things that deepen, they cycle into deeper conversation, as opposed to switching. Excuse me. So, something like, "Oh, that reminds me of something," is switching to another thing. Or, "Oh, that happened to me once," or something like that, as opposed to feeding it back into, excuse me, the speaker's point and the speaker's feelings and the speaker's energy.
Yeah, cool. Very cool. Yeah, I ever since we've been talking about that, I've also been just listening to how I'm listening. And, do I take their sharing deeper, or do I go, "Oh yeah, that happened to me too," or, "Oh yeah, that reminds me of a time that this thing happened over here," or going into fixing, rescuing, advice giving, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Which at EQUUS we call frapping. Fixing, rescuing, advising, pleasing, or protecting.
Very good. And I think the key to it, if I could just throw this in, I think, well, there's a number of keys, but one of the most important keys is to slow down, because our brains go a lot faster than what the other person is saying. Our brains go a lot faster than our own thoughts, which is why there's generally this whole committee of thoughts barraging around, because we have the capacity to hear a lot more and a lot faster. But slowing down is one of the greatest. I mean, you're a mom, you get it. When your kids have something, when my son has something, the most important thing I can do is slow down, get rid of everything else, clear the decks. I'm right here. What do you got?
Yeah, totally. So what was I'm curious why you wanted to, you could have done a podcast on anything. You've had, 30 years experience coaching, consulting, and with all that experience, all that time out in the field, all that time. And I happen to know that you have a background in spiritual psychology and law at some point a long time ago. I mean, you've been in a lot of spaces, men's work. Why spirituality and leadership? What made you want to put that at the pinnacle of your share into the world?
We'll see if it's the pinnacle, but thank you. over the years, as I learn more and speak with more people and grow into different directions, I've started to see that, you know what, some of these most important things to us are related. Why are we keeping them separate?
Mm.
Why would I want to keep separate some of the best of what my team can bring or what I can bring to them? Why, if my goal is my patience or my loving or my ability to hold space for people, why would I want to keep that outside of work, especially where it's needed more than ever? So some of it was just some of the pandemic triggered this for me, and it's, you hear about psychological safety, and you hear about holding space, and you hear about being more inclusive and being more respectful and honoring of other people's stories. Talk about listening, other people's stories are to be heard and listened to. And the idea of keeping separate the things that are most important to us, to me, is fairly insane. And I think the contemporary workplace is more accepting of broader things. We're talking about issues in the workplace now that we didn't talk about 5 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. And that's not a bad thing if we can manage it to the extent that we can listen well and be accepting and be open and be caring. There's more space for holding. I think we're borrowing some of these qualities to have this conversation. But the notion of keeping things separate was just abhorrent to me. And I am inherently, what I try to be is an integrator. So why would I, if someone says this is the most important thing in my life and someone says this is what I'm trying to accomplish at work, why not look for ways to connect these things? Right?
Yeah, I want to just pause that for a moment, because what you just said to me feels really significant. You know, this over here is the most important thing in my life, and what was the other piece? And this over here is
what I'm focusing on the most at work.
At work, and yeah, why would you not put those together?
Right.
Yeah.
So and to the extent, as we're coaches and facilitators, and to the extent that I'm a consultant brought in to support a team or a culture change or a leadership shift or something like that, the ideas that come from spiritual psychology around acceptance and forgiveness and loving, et cetera, helps in a team context. Now, we don't have to use those words. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we can bring in the effectiveness of that and those tools to be successful. So it's about integrating, and it's about applying what we know to be true and to be valuable at work, because that's where I that's where I work, in the workplace.
Yeah. Okay. And so, and I've totally forgotten to do this, but anybody who's listening to the live stream, if you have a question or comment, we do have Kelsey at the helm, our chief storytelling officer. She's responsible for making these live streams happen, and feel free to throw in a question in the chat. She'll read it and feed it to us. Andrew, do you mind to share a story where you've seen, could be any of these, but either where you've seen, people trying to keep these things apart and it's not working, and what the cost was of that, or knitting them together and what sort of unfolded because of that? I'd love to just hear from your own experience, a story about that.
I'd much rather talk about the latter, where it does work. So I have two examples come to mind. One is, I think about a leader, the president of a manufacturing company in Ohio. If he's listening, he's going to know I'm talking about him. Very strong, faith-based individual. Does not talk about his church or anything like that in the workplace. And I know that because I've spoken with some of his people. But the level of compassion and space holding, if that's a term, that he brings to his team is huge. And I think about what his business has gone through in the past few years, being acquired for the purpose of growing and selling and flipping. So the ownership that came in was really short-sighted, relatively uncaring, not people-centric at all. And this man is all about the team. He grew up in that organization. He was hired in his early 20s by the founder of the company. He's now the CEO, and he's in the situation where he has to be the go-between between the acquiring partners who really don't care about people and that's their behavior, that's their tone, and he's
Mm.
got to be a go-between, and he can
Mm.
draw upon his own practice, his own belief system, his own faith, the energy that he brings from that experience to manage this tough workplace situation. And ultimately what happened is that he and a small group was able to buy back the company. He could stay as CEO and essentially, make that work. But the outcome isn't really the point. The point is what he was able to bring to his leadership when his people really, really needed it because of what they were seeing going on up at the top. That'd be one example. And another example would be a C-suite executive of a healthcare network in Tennessee was working with me, and he engaged me to talk about what's next for me in terms of my career. What's the legacy I'd like to leave? And we filtered a lot of our conversation through what were his values and what's the legacy he wanted to have, and what's really the purpose of his work at this point in time. He had been a chief human resources officer, a chief operations officer, just a really gifted man, born in India, living in Tennessee, with his health system, a good leader, good human. And he said to me, I saw the word spiritual in your profile, so I wanted to work with you. And I said, what does that mean for you? And he was talking about his purpose and his values and the legacy he wanted to leave.
Mm.
And so to be able to put that on the table, again, for the benefit of the organization, his constituents, he's talking about starting starting a startup that serves kids with life-threatening illnesses and using technology to support treatment protocols and things like that. It's very much, you want to call it a spiritual purpose, or you want to call it a good thing to do. But that was the focus of these conversations. And to me, that's an example of one of these integrations.
Mm. It feels like the integration almost superpowers things in a way.
Well, it can,
Mhm.
but the beauty of this is that it ain't my superpower. It's
Mhm.
something that's inside of you that's important for you that you can
Mhm.
bring into this conversation. And
Mhm.
my hypothesis in holding these conversations is that opens some energy and some choices and some juice for us because it's really important for me. And I want to hear about your thing and why it's important for you. And again, I don't need to have interviews with people about their spiritual practices, but how do you bring that into your teams?
Mhm.
What's worked for you? And how can I learn from you? For what you bring, how can I take some of that and begin
Yes.
to get the best of that?
Well, just briefly before I wrap our time together up, so you can share with where we can find you.
Okay.
This first story you told about the faith-based man who really kind of deliberately allowed some of those qualities to be in a part of his leadership
Mm-hmm.
is very much the way that those qualities then protected the team from the owners.
Mm-hmm.
And from nature's point of view, from the 56 million year old herd point of view, the leader is the protector. He protects, she
Mm-hmm.
protect the integrity of the herd, the safety, the connection, the peace, joy, and freedom. They protect it. And so it's just very much in alignment with very ancient systems that they're just the way things have been done for a long time, and obviously work, and have
Mm-hmm.
worked for him and his company.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. Well, so Andrew, when your podcast is live, where would they be able to find you?
The podcast is going to be up on all the podcasting sources, Apple
Mhm.
and otherwise. It will also be findable on my website, lighthouseteams.com.
Mhm.
It may also be linked to EQUUS in some way that we can figure out.
Mhm.
Um,
It
and
will.
and we'll see exactly. So, and I appreciate you're offering to have this conversation now, considering that we're really pre-launch.
Mhm.
But yeah, or through, I mean, this is being streamed on LinkedIn and elsewhere. You could look at my LinkedIn profile, which is Andrew Cohn USA.
Mhm.
Although I work globally, I'm
Kelsey's putting it in the chat, so it's all there.
still a proud American at this point.
And people can find you through EQUUS, which is equisinspired.com. And that's also another place where you're splashing around and doing your work there as well. So
And happily.
yes. Well, thank you so much for having this fun conversation. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you,
you.
Kelsey.
This flew by. Thank you,
It
Kelsey.
did. Yeah. Okay. See everybody later. Bye-bye.